It's December and the light is doing its magic thing, and the morning light and the sunset light are so low along the horizon that the world feels a little different. And this is the time of the year when we really need visors for this side of the room. And the stars are out much longer than the sun these days. The stars shine for about 14 hours for the next month, which means that you don't see the sun much except at this low angle. And when the moon is up, we see it through the branches of the bare trees. It's a spare time, an edge time. The darkness is deep, and the light is slant and golden across the land. And we see the world differently. And we see ourselves differently. The darkness is difficult, and the light is still beautiful. The reading this morning is from the book Spiral Dance, which is a book that has been out for decades now. Is one of the books that was important in making Wiccan practice and talking about witches a more normal thing in the world. I encountered spiral dance and pagan or Wiccan practices on the West Coast, where it has a very different context and flavor than it does here within driving distance of Salem, Massachusetts. And I think that this passage is very interesting because she's talking about, Starhawk, the author, is talking about how witchcraft or magic can be understood. And I think you'll hear that it's not that much different from a whole bunch of other spiritual practices that people engage in. This view of the universe as an interplay of moving forces, which incidentally corresponds to an amazing degree with the view of modern physics, is a product of a very special mode of perception. Ordinary waking consciousness sees the world as fixed. It focuses on one thing at a time, isolating it from its surroundings. Much like viewing a dark forest with a narrow flashlight beam that illuminates a lone leaf or solitary stone. Extraordinary consciousness, the other mode of perception, is a broad, holistic, and undifferentiated way. It sees patterns and relationships rather than fixed objects. It is the mode of starlight, dim and silvery, revealing the play of woven branches and the dance of shadows, sensing pathways as spaces in the whole. The magical and psychic aspects of witchcraft are concerned with awakening the starlight vision, as I like to call it, and training it to be a useful tool. Magic is not a supernatural affair. It is, in one definition, the art of changing consciousness at will. The art of changing consciousness at will. Of switching the flashlight off and on, of picking out details and of seeing by the stars. I think we gather here to do just that. To learn to see even when there's only starlight. To learn that the dark has gifts as much as the light does. And to hold the relationships between each other so that we understand that our lives are not unfolding in isolation. part of how we do that is to make a time to listen to each other. Sometimes we're listening to the quiet, and sometimes we're listening to the words. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you would like to speak aloud in the slant light of this December morning, come and stand with me by the piano, and we'll hear your words. We will also be mindful of all that is held in the quiet. We hear sorrow and savoring of the sweetness in the midst of brevity, and we hear gratitude. And we honor all of the stories, wherever they are, in sorrow or sweetness or gratitude. I was up briefly this morning, just after the moon came up. It was dark, and the moon was a crescent, lying on its back, looking for all the world like a chalice there in the sky, ready to hold whatever was happening. It was filled with darkness, and it was going to move through the sky and pick up all the stars as it went by. These are dark days, and may we let our hearts be as open as that crescent moon, able to hold the dark and able to catch the light as we go by it. Point of looking at the sky whenever I can. Sometimes now in my life is in the middle of the night. It does something for my mind to look up like that, to have a sense that the sky always extends beyond where my vision can catch it. I have a lot of memories of lying on the ground watching the sky for clouds or meteors or migrating birds, jet trails, northern lights, sundogs, those little fragments of rainbow that sometimes are just outside of the circle of the sun. So apparently I have been training my mind to do magic all this time, to have that other way of seeing things, of seeing the starlight story. And then there is another shooting, and another one. And we go from starlight to flashlight to the focus that is as focused as bullet point focus on one small part of our lives, and the pain is acute. It seems like this is all there is in the world, this latest threat to the well-being, to the safety of our fellow humans. It is a focused and powerful beam. And it is hard to know what to do besides do what a friend of mine did on Thursday morning. Went out in her backyard and screamed, "No more," and it was hoarse. She thought her neighbors would probably forgive her. I was surprised that no one joined her. And then I sat down to write a letter to my elected officials. And I was trying to find some eloquent words, something to say that hadn't already been said. I read the New York Times editorial for inspiration. They've had several editorials on this matter, including one on the front page yesterday. And I agreed with everything that all of the editorials had to say. And I felt like maybe it had all been said. And I had trouble writing another letter. So instead I decided to write this letter. I think this might be the most eloquent letter that I have on the subject. And I think I may send it. sign it in the corner. It's really all I have left to say on the matter. Everybody has read all of the statistics that are available on gun violence. And there are a lot. And you can interpret them from this angle and from this angle. You can talk about a decade, you can talk about 12 years, you can talk about 17 years, and it shifts the statistics slightly. What we know for sure, though, is that politically, everyone is dug in. Every time it happens, it seems like everyone gets dug in a little bit more. And I do go and read all the articles again, saying that we've had a mass shooting on average of every day this year. Of course, that's using a definition that was created just this year, so it makes the increase more dramatic. But the definition is not an unreasonable one, just a new one. And then there's a statistic out there that gun homicides have in fact declined considerably in the past. Someone said 12 years, but it's actually 17 years. But really there was just a very sharp drop in the mid-90s when the crack epidemic ended and when the Brady Bill went into effect. And after that, they've been pretty steady for a while. What's changed is that these large public shootings have increased considerably. So we're collectively more traumatized, terrorized. Whatever the ideology is, that's what it is. And they've done some studies over and over and found that what happens when people get terrorized like this, when we're suddenly afraid for our lives, which is what has happened. It's hard to go anywhere now without thinking, could it be here? Could it be us? When that thought is on your mind all the time, when you are constantly facing your own mortality, they've learned that it changes how you think about everything else in your life. This happens unconsciously, of course. And one of the big things that happens is that everyone gets a little more rigid about our conditioned beliefs about things. So wherever you started before the terror began, you go deeper into that. Whatever side or position you're on, you cling to it more ardently because it seems like the thing that will bring meaning to this chaos. It's the one thing you've got that might possibly put things together. And so it's in fact true that every time this happens, we dig in. It will get harder and harder to find some kind of resolution. And it's not because we're thinking clearly about anything, it's because we're all terrified. And as you have probably noticed about yourself, when you know that you're terrified, you're usually not at your peak of rational thought or capacity to be creative. Sometimes, but mostly we're not. And so the thing that we know we all have in common in this country now, wherever we sit, ideologically or politically, is that we're all terrified. And that is some common ground that we might be able to build on. So how do we learn to perform some magic to change our consciousness at will? To not respond to another shooting by getting more rigid, which is what our brains do almost automatically. how do we not get backed into an answer more and more so that things just get harder and harder? How do we get a starlight view of this world? One thing that I remember from some of my training is that one of my teachers said, if there is a conflict and you try to resolve it 3 times and you can't resolve it, it's very likely that the conflict is not about what it looks like it's about. The conflict is actually somewhere else, and you're not going to be able to resolve it where it's showing up until you figure out where the root is. And I would say we've tried more than 3 times to resolve this conflict. So I think it's about something else. I just don't know what. But I think it is about something else. And it's hard to say, how can it be about something else? But I think that it is. And so we might try to think about what is underneath this. Yes, there's the fear, but there's some other cultural conflict that is needing resolution. Maybe it's something about our economic system. Maybe it's something about patriarchy. Those 2 things are always worth examining. But I'm pretty sure that we're not going to get movement in this spot about guns until we dig in on something else. Think of the guns as the presenting symptom, but the core of the infection is somewhere else. So I think it means asking a lot of questions, and asking those kinds of open-ended questions, those curious questions that are hard to ask when you're terrified. I think it means digging into our history as a people a little bit. Remember those Puritans and their penchant for public humiliation? That can make it difficult. And to ask not just each other, but to go out and ask people we don't normally engage in this conversation. Open questions. And just see what we hear. These studies that have been done that show that everyone gets more rigid in the face of violent attacks, in the face of fear of dying. These studies say that reminding people of what they value most, of their highest commitments, of God, if that is how they articulate it, that putting that into people's minds lessens the effect of violence and fear of death on their thinking. That reflexive response is lessened by being able to see with a starlight vision. Which means that reading the 7 principles, or our covenant, or our benediction, or probably any of the words on the inside of our new order of service, gives you a hedge against how terror affects your mind. Singing together is a hedge against how terror affects your mind. If you believe in God, praying gives you a hedge against terror. I don't mean that prayer solves the problem. I mean that it might give you space in your mind. It might give you a place where you can move. And then you have to step into that space and make use of it. As Pope Francis is purported to have said recently, we pray for the poor, and then we feed the poor. That is how prayer works. I don't know for sure if he said that, but it's true whether he said it or not. Prayer is not the solution. Prayer turns us toward the solution. But just like walking by starlight at night, you can't see it out there. You know it's out there in the woods, but you can't see it yet. So here is a story about another piece of what's unfolding right now in Paris. We're also going to talk about climate change talks today. It's kind of unrelenting, isn't it? It was just me being a little too intense. But it's the world. So at the Paris talks, there are all these diplomats and heads of state who have gathered to debate whether they should make the required changes required for everyone, or if it should just be strongly encouraged. And who should have to pay for it, or who should be strongly encouraged to pay for it. And while they debate all of this, there's actually another meeting going on in Paris of the mayors of major cities around the world. Have you heard some of this reporting? That some of a lot of mayors have gathered there because the mayors said, you know what, the debate is done. Our city is being affected. We either don't have enough water, or we have too much water, or we're in problem-solving mode right now. And so we, the mayors of the cities around the globe, are going to get together and talk about concrete things we can begin to do last year. And of course, a lot of mayors of cities have done a lot of things. So they're exchanging plans. So this is an international problem that needs an international solution, and it needs people in towns everywhere to say, oh, this is ours to solve. We're going to solve it. We're going to work on it. How can we who live next door to each other, who grow our food, who buy our food together, work together to respond to gigantic crises that are unfolding in our daily lives? There is too much at stake to try to convince the other side of how they are wrong or irrational. We are all terrified. And so maybe we begin with the people in our towns, figuring out what we can do right here, not waiting for someone somewhere else to figure something out. Let's focus on building relationships, on living into our first and seventh principles, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the interdependent web of all existence. What if each of us decided to go out and have some conversation, some open-ended conversations with someone we don't normally talk to in town, and just see what we hear. See if there's a connection that we've been missing. I don't know what will come of that, but it seems like it's an opening in those branches in the dark woods. I think I am going to send my letter, although I'm wondering if it's the right tact. It's not really changing from that kind of dug-in response. It was really good to write it and to yell it while I was driving. Something I advocate that frequently these days. But I think there's another letter or set of letters for me to write to someone a little more local. I haven't figured out what that letter is yet. Maybe it's asking our town elected officials to help us all have an open-ended conversation. A conversation in which we don't accuse each other of being wrong, but in which we invite hearing what's happening inside of the fear for everyone. The thing that we have in common is our fear about what is unfolding. And underneath that is a deep vulnerability that is part of being alive. And I talked a few weeks ago about compassion being, finding a way to not be afraid of the pain. So maybe as spiritual people, our work is to find a way to live with the pain that we are in, to actually hear it and not try to get someone else to enact a solution that we've figured out. It seems very urgent to have a solution enacted. And when we're stuck, we have to change how we respond. Too much is at stake in the world for us to accept the divisions that fear has given us. Please join in our unison benediction. The words are printed in your order of service. Go
in peace, speak truth, give thanks each day, respect the earth and all creatures, for they are alive like you. Care for your body, it is a wondrous gift. Be gentle with yourself, live simply, be of service, be guided by your faith and not your fear. Go lightly on your way, walk in a sacred manner.